Perfect. Welcome everyone to our webinar today about moving to New Zealand. You're joining New Zealand and Australian Shores today. My name is Charlotte Stockman. I am one of our senior licensed advisors here at New Zealand Shores and Australian Shores. However, I am only licensed for New Zealand. I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues, Fabien who is also a senior licensed advisor within our Hamilton office and licensed for New Zealand. And we also have clintivene, who is based in our Christchurch office. She is one of our licensed advisors and she is licensed for New Zealand. So today we just want to talk a little bit about why New Zealand is a wonderful destination and how we can help you achieve that migration plan. So a little bit about us. New Zealand Shores was founded back in 2009. So we are in our 16th year of operating as an immigration consultancy this year. Our team has grown to 12 amazing advisors, and we have another about half a dozen admin staff. Our staff are located in several different countries. So we've got 3 offices here in New Zealand. We've got our head office here in Hamilton, which is where Fabien and myself are based. We have an office in Nelson, and then we have an office in Christchurch, which is where Clintivene is. We also have an office in Ballito in South Africa, and then we do have some support staff scattered around the world as well. So we're a very diverse team. We have 10 nationalities across all of our staff. 12 licensed advisors, as I mentioned, and we have experience on both sides of the job. So what that means is not only are we all immigration advisors, some of our staff have actually previously worked for Immigration New Zealand as well. So we bring a depth of experience to the service we provide just by combining not only a whole bunch of people from really amazing places around the world, but also the fact that we've got people who have worked for the government department as well. So it gives us a little bit of insight into how Immigration New Zealand process visas. So today we're going to cover basically 4 main categories of information. So we've got, as you can see there, life in New Zealand visas, what that job search and opportunity process looks like at the moment, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. So there is the chat function, which you can drop your questions into. We won't be able to get to everyone's questions. We may answer some of them in the chat as we're speaking, and then some others will be answered live. If we haven't answered your question and you'd like to follow up with us on that, our emails will be at the end of the presentation for you to connect with us as well. So a few basic facts about New Zealand. We are quite a big landmass and virtually nobody lives here. So if you look at all those white patches on that map, that is actually where our population is dotted around the country. You'll see that we have more people living in the north than we do in the south, and we have a total population of 5.2 million. Our biggest city, Auckland, which is in the North Island, actually has over 1 million of those people. So that kind of puts into context how spread out the rest of us are throughout our beautiful, beautiful country. So just a few fun facts about New Zealand that we think are somewhat funny and special. So there are 5.1 sheep to every person in New Zealand. We get a lot of sheep jokes coming from Australia. You're always closer than 128 k's from the ocean. So for example, where we are in Hamilton, we are virtually right in the middle of the North Island. We are one of our landlocked cities, and it takes us 45 minutes to get to the coast on one side for surfing, and then about an hour to get to the coast on the other side for beautiful white sandy beaches. So you're never too far from the coast, which is a great thing about living here. We are the first country in the world to see the sunrise. So there are a lot of people at the new year who actually travel to New Zealand just so they can be here to be one of those first people in the world to bring in the new year, which is pretty cool. We are the least corrupt nation in the world. So that is something we're really proud of. Government are really transparent, businesses are really transparent, and our laws require them to be so. We also have a pretty low unemployment rate, which is sitting at around 5.1% at the moment. So comparatively to a lot of other countries, that is quite low at the moment. And we're also free of animals that want to kill you. So if you love being out in the outdoors, we don't have any snakes or spiders or big land mammals that will come and bite you or poison you or attack you. So if you love getting out and about, you can do so without having to worry about any of those things, which I particularly like. And we are a country which is built on migrants. So we were colonised in the 1880s. And prior to that, we had our local Indigenous population, which were the Maori people. And since then, we have just been a nation built on people migrating to New Zealand. So that gives us a really diverse population, for which you'll see we're about 74% European descent, which just comes from the fact that we were largely settled by people coming from the UK, and then 15% Māori population, 12% Asian, and 7.5% are Pacific Islanders. And that's just because we are so close to the Pacific Islands, and we have got a number of agreements with them to help people move to New Zealand. So we'll jump into a bit of visa-related information now. So the first thing we're going to talk about is partners and the different categories for partners coming into New Zealand. So there's a couple of things that Immigration New Zealand will assess a partnership on, and this applies to everyone. It doesn't matter whether you are the partner of a New Zealand citizen or resident, or whether you are the partner of a person looking to apply for a work or student or investor visa, whatever it may be. The first thing they assess your relationship is whether you are in a genuine relationship and whether that relationship is likely to endure. So things they look for are that you've got family support, and from your relationship, that people are aware that you are in a relationship together, and that you are, I guess, interacting in society as a couple. The second factor they look at is, are you living together? So we get a lot of people who may have been married for several years and get quite frustrated that they have to prove this, but Immigration New Zealand want to see that you've actually been residing at the same address for a period of time, and that period of time is dictated by the type of visa you are applying for.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there for a second, Charlotte. A very common question we have is, do we actually need to be married? I think it's only a small criteria for Immigration New Zealand. There's no requirement to be married per se. If you are, that's great. It's going to play in your favor. But by all means, it's not a requirement for visa purposes. Immigration will focus on the evidence that your relationship's genuine, and particularly, as you pointed out, that you've been living together.
Yeah, thanks for that, Fabien. Sorry, I should have mentioned that one. Cool. So under your rights as the partner of a New Zealand citizen or resident or person applying for a visa, typically the right on your partnership visa would be to accompany. Often you will have the right to work, which largely will come down to the visa status of the principal applicant. So in this case, the principal applicant is your partner, who is the person that is applying for the visa. Your visas are generally granted for the same duration as well. So if your partner gets a 5-year work visa, for example, then you will also get a 5-year work visa to match, and that will apply to children accompanying you as well, which I'll go over a little bit later in our webinar. There are two main visa categories for partners. So as I mentioned, there's partners of New Zealand citizens or residents, so their process is slightly different. They have different visa categories to those who are coming as the partners of workers or student visa holders. So we class and immigration class partnerships into those two very separate categories. And there are, as I mentioned, different thresholds in regards to the evidence you have to provide depending on what visa type you are applying for. So the threshold for applying for a temporary visa, like a work visa or a visitor visa, is much lower to that of applying for a residency visa. So if you are applying for a residency visa, you have to prove you've been living together for 12 months, and that is dictated in Immigration New Zealand policy. The threshold for temporary visas, there isn't actually a specific time frame stipulated in policy. So what we often end up doing is we actually end up working with you to look at your documentation if you've lived with your partner for less than 12 months to figure out whether or not you have sufficient evidence for a work visa. And if not, we can then look at other options such as visitor visas for you as well, just to bridge a gap until you can gather more evidence. So some common issues we come across, people who haven't lived together at all. So that may be for personal reasons or logistical reasons, or perhaps they haven't lived together for quite long enough. As I mentioned, in that case, you may then go and look at other visa options to get you into the country while you build up more relationship evidence. Some people have insufficient evidence, and again, that may be circumstantial. Some places in the world, it's really hard to get documents in both names, or it may be hard to even get documents in a female's name just because of the way those countries operate. So again, that's something we can work with you to try and figure out how we can build together a picture to show that you have actually been living together in that genuine relationship. And if your partner has supported 2 or more partners previously, then that does stop you from being able to apply for a visa. So Immigration New Zealand don't allow people to just continually be getting new partners and then sponsoring them for visas in New Zealand. So again, if you're in that ballpark, please do reach out and we can have a chat with you around ways to potentially make your situation work. So moving on to dependent children. So if you have dependent children, generally they are able to accompany you to New Zealand. Again, different criteria attached to that. So the definition of a dependent child actually varies depending on the visa type you are applying for. So for a temporary visa, let's say you're applying for work visas and you want your children to accompany with you to New Zealand, the age limit to consider them dependent under those visa categories is actually 19. Whereas when you're applying for residency, Immigration New Zealand will actually accept them being dependent up until the age of 24. So there are some people who get stuck in that gap between 19 and 24. And again, we can help figure out a solution for you if your children are in that niggly age bracket. Your children do have to be age 17 or younger and single in some cases. So and it all comes down to what you have to prove to make sure they are dependent. So if they are age 17 or younger and single, no evidence is needed to be provided to show that they are dependent. When it comes to being aged 18 to 20, they have to have no children and be single. Sometimes Immigration New Zealand will ask for evidence to prove that they are dependent, but when we're getting into the age brackets of 20 to 24, they have to be single, again, have no children, but you also have to prove that they are financially dependent. So in that age bracket of 21 to 24, there's no way around it. So being financially dependent may be that they're not working full-time and that they're living at home and you are supporting them in some way. They may be studying, or they may even be actually living with another family member. So again, there's a lot of situations that are accepted that we can work with you to prove that dependency to include your children. You do need to establish the relationship to the child. So you do have to prove that you have either adopted the child or that the child is biologically yours. So obviously that comes with documentation that we have to provide, so either adoption certificates or a birth certificate. Birth certificates must include both parents' names. So it can't just be the name of the child and where they were born. They actually have to include your names as well to show that they are your children. And for some countries, Immigration New Zealand will also accept household registration documents which show parents and children associated with that household. So children are able to accompany parents based on whether they meet the dependency criteria for temporary visas or a resident visa. Children up to the age of 19 are able to attend school. So when I say school, I mean primary school, high school in New Zealand free of charge. But if they are at early childhood age, early childhood education, you do have to pay. So everyone in New Zealand pays for early childhood education. There's no way around that, unfortunately. You are eligible for 23 hours per week once the child is 3 and above, though, and that applies to anyone regardless of their visa status. So if you're on a work visa, you're able to access that childcare subsidy. Once a child is 16, so that generally fits into about year 12 or older, they can also obtain part-time work rights. So if they're wanting to get out there and earn some pocket money, they can do so. There is a process you have to go through with Immigration New Zealand in order to be able to get those work rights, but it's quite a straightforward process. And children are entitled to free medical care. So as long as their visa is 2 years or longer, or their parents are entitled to free healthcare in New Zealand, then the child will be as well. Children up to the age of 13 in New Zealand actually get free GP visits as well. So that's a government initiative just to make sure we're keeping kids nice and healthy and there's no barriers to access. GP visits typically pretty cheap though. So for example, I pay $25 to go see my GP, so it's not significantly expensive even once they turn 13. So again, visa categories. So for children who are 0 to 19 inclusive, depending on age, so children age 0 to 4 can obtain visitor visas, and that's because they're not old enough to attend school yet. That visitor visa would be granted for the same duration as your visa. So if you're coming in on a 5-year work visa, your children will get a 5-year visitor visa. Generally, from about 4 onwards, Immigration New Zealand will grant student visas. Sometimes case officers are a bit pedantic about it, and we do see some cases where they don't. So if they're close to turning 4, we would always apply for a visitor visa. However, if they're kind of about 4.5, we'd always apply for a student visa because immigration will generally grant it. Student visas are available for dependent children from the ages, as I mentioned, about 4.5 right up until 19, because that's the upper limit of when children can attend high school in New Zealand. After that, they need to move on to something else. Children can be included up to the age of 24 for residency. Again, as I mentioned, you have to be able to prove they're dependent on you though. So if your 23 or 24-year-old child is working full-time and has a family of their own, they're not classed as dependent. Unfortunately, they do have to be reliant on you financially. Some common issues we do come up against just moving forward with that financial dependency is evidence to prove that they are financially dependent. So immigration, once they do get into that 21 to 24 age bracket, definitely do want dependency evidence. So you need to be able to prove that you've been supporting them. Typically, if they're living at home, quite easy to do so, or if they're studying full-time, it's also quite easy to do so. If they're in other situations where perhaps they've moved out to another family members or they're only working part-time, we do have to be a bit more pedantic about the evidence we're providing. If you have separated or divorced from another parent and you're wanting to bring that child with you, there are custody documents which have to be provided that show you have the right to remove that child from your country, and that the type of documents actually depend on the country you are coming from. So it just has to be in accordance with local law. That can obviously be a bit of a tricky thing to navigate if the other parent isn't necessarily keen on you taking the child out of their home country. If you are in that situation, please do reach out because we can give you some guidance on how to navigate that process. The other thing that's a bit of a niggle point at the moment is adult children whose parents are on temporary visas. So if your kids are in that 19 to 24 age bracket and perhaps you have to work in New Zealand for 2 or 3 years before they're able to apply for residence with the family, we do have to navigate what they do in that time frame, because technically they're only allowed to be in New Zealand on a 9-month visitor visa once we've hit that age bracket. So they can come and study as international students. So yeah, or they may decide to remain at home until you're able to apply for residence. But again, as a family, we can help you decide what's best in that space. Immigration New Zealand in the last couple of months have actually tightened policy around children with, in particular, autism and developmental delays. So they have brought the temporary visa policy in line with the residency visa policy. So if your children does have learning difficulties or is on an autism spectrum, please do reach out, because not having autism in itself doesn't necessarily mean you won't be approved a visa, but you may risk having a decline depending on where on that spectrum a child sits. So they are definitely just trying to make sure that our education system can cater to everyone that needs it, particularly with special education. So please do reach out if you feel like your child may fall into that category, and we can chat through that with you as well.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for this overview. Naturally, most of our clients intend on relocating with their family, so that's why we thought it was probably a good idea to start off with partner and dependent children matters. Now, relocation beyond the immigration process, there's a lot of practical information that springs to mind, and one of these is the health cover. How am I going to have to pay for private insurance and that sort of thing? What's the health system like in New Zealand? I have to say the health system in New Zealand as a whole is pretty good. The cover that the public funded system provides is generally quite quick and quite good quality. one point that we need to differentiate is the care that you would be getting in case of accident versus medical. So if you get injured while in New Zealand, you'll be covered under ACC, which is our Accident Compensation Corporation. It's a scheme that is largely funded by income tax and essentially covers everyone in New Zealand, regardless of your visa status. So even if you're coming to visit and I don't know, you fall down the stairs or something, you want to go to the hospital, it is going to be an ACC claim and you'll be covered. For medical, the immigration system is actually quite generous because as long as you secure a work visa for 2 years or more, you're going to be covered for medical issues by the public funded health system. So again, a work visa granted for 2 years or more triggers that cover for yourself and your family. Needless to say, resident visa holders can benefit from the cover as well. International students, however, don't, but private insurance is mandatory for international students, so you're sort of covered regardless. And naturally, visitors are not covered for medical care, just for injuries. Another important matters for people looking to relocate with their family is schooling. So very high quality education in New Zealand from early childhood right up to tertiary education. And just a minor distinction to be made between public education and private education. You'll find various levels of opportunities depending on the school and the region you go to. However, around, I think, 85% of New Zealand children go to public schools. My kids went to public school as well, and I was very happy with the education there. Coming myself from overseas as well, I moved to New Zealand from France. I have to say the education in New Zealand is a lot less academic and a lot more community and life skills oriented, which I think is a really good thing. Dependent children, again, the immigration system is very generous on that side of things. If you secure a role and temporary work visas for New Zealand, you can apply for dependent children student visas for your kids aged 5 and above, and that will allow them to study in New Zealand at public schools free of charge. This is quite a big difference compared to, say, Australia. I don't know, a lot of people are considering both, perhaps, where you have to be an Australian resident to benefit from free schooling. So again, on temporary work visas or residents, your kids can go to school free of charge. They can attend early childhood as well if they age under 5. Not free for anyone in New Zealand, early childhood, but largely subsidized. Lastly, if you're on a temporary visas, as I mentioned, your kids can go to school, including ECE, primary and secondary, but that does not include tertiary education. And this is sort of a niggly point that Charlotte was referring to. If you have children aged 19 or above and you're still on temporary visas, that's where it could be tricky to navigate from a timeline perspective. Now, moving to tertiary education. Unless you are a New Zealand resident or citizen, you are going to pay international fees to study at university or polytech in New Zealand, which is fine, though a lot more expensive and requiring a different set of visas. New Zealand Shores, we do immigration, but we also education agents for the vast majority of education providers, so we can manage your enrollment process. And as a matter of fact, studying in New Zealand as an international student is a great way to get a foot in the country, secure some time in New Zealand, boost your career with a globally recognized qualification, and map out your migration to New Zealand longer term. We'll get to that in the next few slides. Another consideration is how much you're going to earn. New Zealand has various indexes and indicators in terms of median wage and average family income. What's important to remember is that New Zealand is sort of on par with most first world countries in terms of salaries. You might get paid a little bit less than the US, a little bit more than the UK. It depends on the industry, where you're going to end up in New Zealand, what your actually occupation is. But the income tax, I find is a very fair system. As you can see here on screen, it's a tiered system, and it's taken directly by your employer off your pay, so it's relatively painless in a way, unless you have additional income coming from other sources, perhaps self-employment or overseas income, which you're going to have to declare yearly. But other than that, let's say for an annual salary of about $100,000, you're looking to shed about 25% to tax overall. And a small portion of that, as I mentioned, goes to the ACC accident scheme. Retirement. There is no actually legal age for retirement in New Zealand. However, all Kiwis, all New Zealand residents or citizens are eligible for NZ Super from the age of 65, which means everything you've accrued over your career, you can claim a portion of it back upon retirement. So there are exact numbers depending on whether you live by yourself or you live with a couple, and these are paid either weekly or fortnightly, and you can choose to opt into a private retirement scheme, which we call KiwiSaver. It's not mandatory, but most Kiwis will actually chip in. And that system is pretty great because you decide to allocate 3 to 8% of your income towards your KiwiSaver funds, and you can get all of it back upon retirement. You can actually get it earlier too if you buy your first home or if you decide to leave New Zealand on a long-term basis. Overseas pension, there are different schemes depending on the country you're coming from as well, including Canada, Ireland, or the UK, whereby you can actually receive your overseas pension while living in New Zealand. Now, this might actually impact your New Zealand pension, so you don't double dip, but it's something we can chat with you about.
Okay, over to me. Hi, everyone. So I'm basically going to discuss the visa pathways, the many visa pathways for New Zealand. So if we do not touch on anything that's unique to your particular circumstance, then please feel free to reach out to us for an eligibility assessment so we can assess you accordingly and advise you what the best pathway will be for you. So today we will mainly be focusing on the accredited employer work scheme, touch on a bit about working holiday visas for those candidates who are from certain countries and have those rights to come here on a working holiday visa. And we'll also briefly discuss student visa pathways a little bit later in the presentation. So just to give you a brief overview of the multiple temporary visas available to people, if you are a partner of a New Zealander, you could potentially get a temporary visa that eventually leads to residence. Under the partnership category, there are also multiple visitor visa options for those looking to look, see, and decide in New Zealand to determine whether New Zealand would be the place they would like to settle down permanently. The government has also recently announced the digital nomad visa. So if that is of interest, please do let us know so we can provide you with eligibility assessment and a quote for that service as well, because the nomad visa essentially allows you to live in New Zealand temporarily while you continue to work remotely for your employer offshore. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to us directly. There are also various pathways for grandparents and parents of either New Zealand citizens or New Zealand resident visa holders. So again, if any of these topics, these visas that we do not cover today, feel free to reach out to us. The first working holiday visa program, or rather the first working visa category we'll discuss is the working holiday. And these are available to select 45 countries. There are certain age limits and requirements that you need to meet in order to be eligible for this pathway. So you've got to be between 18 and 35, have no dependent children. And depending on which country you come from, you can either remain in New Zealand for 6 months, or if you are potentially from the UK, up to 36 months. So lots of flexibility there in terms of arriving on shore And the good option about the working holiday visa program is that you do not need a job offer in order to submit this visa. You simply just, based on meeting these criteria, you'll be able to come on shore. I will just caution you that certain countries have specific quotas, so it's not necessarily available year-round. So it's best to contact us immediately so that we can see whether this pathway is still available to you. Right, so this accredited employer work visa scheme is the one that most people are interested in, because obviously in order for you to get this work visa that is potentially valid for up to 5 years, depending on what your skills are, you would need an offer of employment. So it's a two-step process. I'll touch on what the employer would need to do in a little bit in the next slide. But for now, all you need to know is that the 5-year work visa is linked to a specific employer. You have to live and work in that specific location, and it is very much dependent on your role. So your role will determine how long you will get that visa for. You would also need to be paid a market rate. So it's very important that you seek professional immigration advice from us so we can advise you further on what that market rate would look like for your occupation in your role, because that could also be very dependent on where you get that job offer. So that's something to be mindful of. Once you get this work visa, or you're eligible for this work visa, you can also include your family visas, your family, and they can then get dependent partner work visa and dependent children visa. This partner visa is an open partner work visa, which means that the partner will be able to live and work in New Zealand along with you, and that would be linked to the validity or duration of your visa. So in order for the employer to assist you with the accredited employer work visa, the employer needs to be accredited. So essentially what that means is that the Immigration New Zealand will need to determine whether the employer is a genuine employer. You know, because Immigration New Zealand doesn't want a situation where you come over, you bring your family, you get settled here, and, you know, the job offer falls through. So New Zealand is very much big on preventing migrant exploitation and making sure that the job offer you get is a credible job offer. The employer is verifiable and genuine. So the employer has to become accredited. And once the employer is accredited, the employer would then need to submit a job check application for the role, which is essentially a labor market test, advising Immigration New Zealand that they could not fill the role locally, and therefore they need to hire someone from offshore. Because Immigration New Zealand, is an aging population, it does lend itself to a lot of employers looking for people offshore. So that's why we've got this accredited employer scheme. And once the employer has completed the job check application, they've undergone the labor market test, they will then issue, Immigration New Zealand will then issue you a job token for the role that will allow you to then apply for the work visa. So it's a little bit more involved in terms of getting the job offer from the employer, making sure the employer is accredited. The employer would need to do the job check, and then we then go ahead and submit your work visa application for you. And if you have family, we submit accompanying family visas for them as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Clint. And we'll touch up later on how we as an agency can help you link yourself to an employer and ensure that everything goes smoothly. So it's going to be broached later on with the job market in New Zealand.
Awesome, thanks guys. So I'm just going to chat through our main residency visa pathways that we have here in New Zealand. So the vast majority that our clients move through are either the green list occupations, which is broken up into 2 separate lists called Tier 1 and Tier 2, or it's the skilled migrant category. So for all of our skilled migrants coming to New Zealand, you typically fit into one of those 2 pathways in a number of manners in terms of eligibility. We aren't really going to talk about the sector agreement pathways just because they are becoming a lot harder to attain, and there is now only the care workforce sector in there which applies, and unfortunately it's an industry that's a bit flooded with applicants at the moment, so a number of our clients trying to migrate under that pathway are struggling, so we're not going to delve into that. But if you do have specific questions, please do reach out to us and we can give you some guidance in that space. We do also process a lot of partnership resident visas as well, so that's partners of New Zealand citizens or residents who are living offshore who want to migrate to New Zealand. So the green list is our newly renamed, basically it's a skills shortage list, and Immigration New Zealand have broken it down into 2 different tiers. So we've got tier 1, which is a fast-tracked residency pathway, which we call the straight to resident visa. It's predominantly a lot of medical professionals, but there's also some ICT professionals in there, and then a few engineers and construction project managers. But it's a lot smaller than that tier 2 of the green list. So tier 2 is a work to residence pathway, which requires you to work in New Zealand for 2 years in that particular occupation, meeting the particular occupation's criteria. And then at the end of that 2-year pathway, you can apply for residency in New Zealand. So if you're coming in under tier 2 of the green list, you will need to apply for an accredited employer work visa, obviously with an accredited employer, which Clintivene has just covered off. Whereas if you do fall into tier 1 of the green list, 9 times out of 10, you are able to apply for residence before you even leave your home country and enter New Zealand with a residency visa. There are some exceptions to that, perhaps if you've got medical concerns, character concerns, or if you're from a country which Immigration New Zealand requires you to go through extra national security checks. All of those things can slow down the processing of those residency visas. So case by case, we may actually recommend that even though you qualify for straight to residence, that we will get you to apply for work visas first, just so you can get into the country, start work while your residence application processes in the background. So regardless of which tier of the green list we look at, there are specific criteria which you have to meet. As I mentioned, this is a fast-tracked pathway, so even though there's 151 occupations on there, the criteria is quite specific in terms of what you have to meet. So like all residence categories, you have to be 55 or under, so that is 55 inclusive, so you can apply for residence effectively up until the day before you turn 56. There are wage thresholds attached depending on your occupation. So for example, if you're a healthcare professional, you just have to be paid a median wage or higher and market rate. So median wage for residency at the moment is $31.61 per hour, but then you also have to be paid market rate. So if you're a doctor, for example, you would obviously be paid a lot more than $31.61 per hour, because that is about 61,000 New Zealand dollars per year, whereas a doctor is likely to be earning up around 200,000 plus. So effectively what median wage and market rate do is they protect migrants from being paid less than what they're meant to be. So that's a really important thing. For a lot of our ICT professionals on that green list, the salary threshold is a lot higher. So it's set at about 135,000 or higher. So you actually have to meet that pay rate to be able to apply for residence. If you're below that, then we will have to look at other residency pathways for you, even if your occupation is on that green list. Some occupations will require registration, so predominantly our healthcare workers, some engineers may require registration depending on the type of engineering work you're doing, but it is a legal requirement for healthcare workers in New Zealand to hold a registration. So Immigration New Zealand cannot grant you a visa until you have that, which is why that is set as one of the criteria against some occupations in that list. Everyone also has to pass an English language test, so regardless of whether you're applying under tier 1 of the green list or tier 2 or even the skilled migrant category, you have to be able to demonstrate through an English language test that you have an acceptable standard of English. The straight to resident visas are processing pretty quickly. At the moment, we're typically seeing about a 6 to 8 week processing timeframe, if not faster. I recently had a nurse who, she didn't believe me that her residence visa was going to process that quickly. She'd heard stories online of them taking several months. She even told me once that she thought it could take up to a year, which Pre-COVID, some resident visas had, and I said, no, that's fine. So we applied for the straight to resident visa, and the day after I submitted a accredited employer work visa application for her because that's what she wanted us to do. And her straight to resident visa was actually completely approved before her accredited employer work visa had even been allocated to a case officer. Some cases it can be really quick. Doesn't mean everyone will be that quick, but in some cases it will be. As you're entering New Zealand with a straight to resident visa, you basically have the same rights as a New Zealand citizen does, just minus a passport. So you can roll in our retirement scheme KiwiSaver, you can vote, you can purchase a home once you can prove that you're ordinarily resident in New Zealand. As Fabien mentioned, you've got access to free healthcare and education, and your family can join you. So it's there's no job check required by the employer. The employer does still have to be accredited, but they don't have to go through that job check process, which means they don't have to advertise the role, because Immigration New Zealand effectively recognise that if you're on these green lists, that there is a shortage of you in New Zealand. So the employer isn't having to demonstrate why they're hiring you, which is a bonus.
Sorry, I'll just jump in there for a second, Charlotte, because we've had a couple of questions in the chat about this. We will not be covering in detail the parent categories today, but as a New Zealand resident, as soon as you get residency, or 3 years after, depending on the categories, you may be able to sponsor your parents. So a typical example is you secure a job as a secondary school teacher. You can apply straight for residency because it's on tier 1 of the green list, and you land in New Zealand as a resident. And from there on, there are options to sponsor your parents to join you here. Some are based on your income in New Zealand, others are based on their income overseas. So if you're in that situation and you're interested to find out a bit more about parent categories, do reach out to us.
Thanks, Fabien. So tier 2 of the green list, much like tier 1, has specific criteria based around what the occupation is. So again, some may require occupational registration, some may require specific qualifications, some may require a specific pay rate. Because you are coming into New Zealand on a work visa first, so you have to work in New Zealand for 2 years before you can qualify for residency under this list. Your employer does have to go through a job check, but they don't have to advertise. Job checks generally pretty quick for green list roles anyway. If it is needed, Immigration New Zealand prioritise them, and we're generally seeing them come through often in a matter of days. So they are definitely fast tracking those, just because again, New Zealand needs you. There's no points testing. So sorry, I should have mentioned that on the other slide because that was popped there. So anyone who knows anything about the skilled migrant category will know that that all comes down to points. Points don't apply in either of these categories. It's just that you have to meet that specific criteria that applies to your occupation. So moving on to the skilled migrant category. So this is our points-based category. Again, you have to be 55 or younger. Points are made up of one of 3 factors predominantly. So the majority of your points will either come from qualification, so it's bachelor's degree or higher, your job offer salary level. So if we're looking at salary, it's 1.5 times the median wage or higher. At the moment, 1.5 times the median wage is $47.41 per hour, which equates to about $98,000 per year. Or you have an occupational registration in New Zealand. So there's a bit of an interesting crossover, particularly with some of those green list roles that require occupational registration and the skilled migrant category, because all of those occupations are also listed under the skilled migrant category as being able to claim points. But what we do is we look at you and your specific situation, and we will weigh up what is the best category for you to apply under. So if there's a faster pathway, then we will always recommend our clients go through the faster pathway rather than the slower one. The remainder of your points will come from New Zealand work experience. So for probably 99% of people applying under the skilled migrant category, you're going to have to work in New Zealand for somewhere between 12 months to 3 years. So for example, if you hold a bachelor's degree, your bachelor's degree is worth 3 points, which means your other 3 points are going to have to come from New Zealand work experience. So you can claim 1 point for each year of New Zealand work experience up to a maximum of 3 years. So in that case, a person with a bachelor's degree would have to work for 3 years in New Zealand before they're able to apply for residency. 1.5 times the median wage is the same. So we'll go over a case study here which covers that, but Wei, who is our workshop foreman, he's 52 years old. He has no qualifications, but because he is earning that 1.5 times the median wage at $47.41 per hour, he can claim those 3 points. So he just simply has to work in New Zealand for 3 years. He's going to get in right before he turns 56 based on his age there, and he will be able to apply for residence. So in some ways, it offers a bit of flexibility for those who don't have qualifications or occupational registrations. If you're really good at your job and your employer likes you and they give you a really good salary, then it opens up options for you as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Charlotte. One topic I'm going to cover now is the student pathway, or studying in New Zealand as an international student. So if you're perhaps a recent graduate, or you're mid-career and you're looking for a change, or you're at that stage where you're thinking you could benefit from another qualification, then we'd absolutely recommend the student pathway. A few points to remember here. You would be studying in New Zealand as an international student, which means quite higher fees as you would a domestic student, but well worth it. As education agents, we manage your enrollment in the visa process, and in many cases, we can actually provide the service free of charge. And this is due to our relationship with education providers and the commission system that is mainstream in the industry. Depending on the role that you choose, upon graduation, you might be eligible for a post-study work visa of up to 3 years, which allows you plenty of time to secure the right role towards your residency. And as education agents, we would help you, based on your budget and your wishes, help you decide on the location, when to start, what's reasonable, what's a good course for you to choose. Again, depending on the course that you opt for, you might be able to bring your partner alongside and your children. So it's very important to keep in mind not only where you want to do, what you want to do, and what your budget is, but if that course is going to allow you or not to bring your family with you, and is going to grant you the right to secure a post-study work visa after all, after your graduation. So as education agents, again, we represent all the top universities, polytechs, and private providers in New Zealand. A quick case study here, which is a very common case for us. Let's say you've got a Bachelor of Computer Science, you've worked for about 10 years, and you're thinking you might want to study again. We'd probably recommend a Master of Software Engineering because it's an occupation in high demand in New Zealand, so you're likely to secure employment after your studies. There are options anywhere from 1 to 2 years. So again, depending on your budget, the education provider, how long you're willing to study, we would recommend different options. But let's say, for argument's sake, a Master of Software Engineering of a year here, because it's a level 9 occupation, under current policy, it actually allows your partner to accompany you and get open work rights while you study. And your children can also come with you during your studies, and they will be granted dependent children student visas, age 5 to 19, once again, allowing them to study free of charge at New Zealand school. So that is during your studies. Upon graduation, master's levels give you the opportunity upon graduating to secure a 3-year post-study work visa, during which you can work for any employer in any job. And alongside that, your family can also apply for visas to match. So again, open work visa for your partner and student visas for your children. The point of how you should use those 3 years is essentially to secure skilled employment, so a reasonably good position, and that would allow you to claim work experience towards a skilled migrant category application. So this would look like this: typically a master's level qualification under the skilled migrant point system is worth 5 points. Which leaves you with having to work in New Zealand for a year to get that missing point up to 6. So 6 points makes you eligible under SMC. So by studying in New Zealand potentially just for 1 year, you could secure residency after 2 years in New Zealand. Another great example is studying towards teaching registration. If you are a teacher back home and you'd like to learn a bit more about the New Zealand education system, there are courses as short as a year that would lead to registration in New Zealand. And because primary and secondary school teachers are on tier 1 of the green list, as soon as you've completed your studies, you will very likely secure employment with the school alongside registration with the Teaching Council, and you can actually apply for residency immediately on that basis. So the student pathway is really a great opportunity to work towards an established time frame if you have a little bit of a budget to work with. And this is something we'd love to discuss with you because, as I mentioned, we're agents for the vast majority of New Zealand universities, polytechs, so we can work within your time frame, your goals, and your budget. Now, on a completely different note, one question we get very often is, how do I get PR, or what's the difference between residence and permanent residency? So I'm just going to touch on this very briefly. The one thing to remember is that the hard one is residency, is the one that's going to get you a resident visa, whether through the green list or through partnership or through the skilled migrant point system. This is the complex, costly application to go through and to get over the line. Once you're a resident, that's great. It is only going to come with travel conditions for 2 years. And these travel conditions are purely down to presence requirements. Think of it as a bit of a commitment to living in New Zealand for 2 years upon securing residency. Again, it's not linked to employment or anything else. It's purely your physical presence in New Zealand. You're allowed to travel in and out of the country, but Immigration New Zealand would want to make sure you live in New Zealand for at least half the time each year. Some exemptions apply, but it gets a bit technical. So the thing to remember is, as long as you live in New Zealand as your home base for 2 years after residency, you should be able to apply for permanent residency, which is just a lifting of your travel conditions and allows you to retain permanent residency for the rest of your life, regardless of your whereabouts. If you want to progress to citizenship, the presence requirements is another 3 years beyond PR. So 5 years living in New Zealand as a resident in total, with a minimal presence required each year. So if you have some questions about this, feel free to reach out to us and we can give you the exact requirements. But again, the hard one to get over the line is really that first residency option. One thing to remember, though, is that New Zealand allows dual citizenship, but other countries may not. So you don't have to apply for citizenship. You could remain in New Zealand indefinitely as a permanent resident attached to your home country passport, or you could decide that you want to get a New Zealand passport. But you do need to be mindful of whether your country of origin does allow dual citizenship.
Okay, we will be having a webinar for Australia specifically next week on the 22nd. So if that is of interest to you, please do reach out to us so we can give you an assessment for the best pathway moving forward. The main differences between New Zealand and Australia, and we tend to get this question quite a lot because Australia and New Zealand are like sister countries. So quite similar in terms of lifestyle, the people, the culture. But when it comes to the actual immigration pathways, they are very different. So for New Zealand, just to quickly reiterate, you need a job offer because that job offer, in most instances for our skilled migrants, is the catalyst for your immigration pathway. There are higher age limit requirements for residents. So it does make it a little bit more appealing for our very skilled people who may just fall just short of the age criteria for Australia. But New Zealand is, we always say, is the back door to Australia. So our clients who tend to not be able to qualify for Australia tend to go through the New Zealand pathway, get their citizenship, and once they get that citizenship, they get unfettered access to Australia, to the healthcare system, etc. So just to quickly recap on Australia, Australia is very attractive to most of our clients offshore because you do not need a job offer in order to be eligible under the general skilled migration. So if Australia is of a country of interest to you and you are quite comfortable in your home country and willing to wait for the residence application to be processed, definitely touch base with us and then we can assess you further. Like I said, with Australia, the age limit is quite low. It's 45. So, you know, there's some complexities there in terms of getting your qualifications assessed, but we will touch base on this next week, Thursday, when we focus on Australia.
Great, thank you, Clint. Oh, you're on mute, Charlotte?
Sorry, everyone. Just jumping into a bit of information about getting a job in New Zealand, because for a vast majority of people, that is definitely the pinch point of this process. We talk a lot about the catch-22, where you need a job to apply for a visa, but some employers will say you need a visa before you can apply for a job. So there are a number of industries which are critically in demand in New Zealand and Australia who are looking for migrants in particular. So we've just listed a few of them here. These are just the main industries that we've kind of seen trends in the last couple of years. It doesn't mean that if your industry or your occupation isn't on that list that you won't get a job. We see people from all sorts of walks of life and all sorts of occupations with varying qualifications and experience getting job offers in New Zealand. So it's not just this list exclusively, but if you are on this list, you are very much in demand in both New Zealand and Australia. The New Zealand job market can be a little bit of an interesting one to navigate sometimes. We find often that regional demand drives a lot of job opportunities in New Zealand. So don't be afraid to look outside the main centres of Auckland, Hamilton, Wellington, Christchurch. A lot of our clients will end up in smaller places that surround those cities. So do keep your mind open to where you apply for jobs. Some people will come to us and they've decided that we're moving, to one of those bigger cities just because they've got family there, and that's fine. But if you're not in that situation, definitely keep your search broad and look at job opportunities throughout New Zealand. Searching for roles and applying for roles is obviously really important. Do make sure that you are only applying for jobs that fit you specifically. And we say that because we get a lot of clients who will send out hundreds and hundreds of job applications for roles that they're not necessarily skilled or qualified for. And if those applications are falling on the desk of a recruiter, they may start sort of pushing your CV aside because you're flooding them a little bit too much. So do be particular about what you're looking for and only apply for the roles that you've got a good chance at getting. Recruitment companies can be really helpful. However, don't rule out applying to employers directly. Recruiters are obviously just another piece of the puzzle that you've kind of got to get over a hurdle with. Sometimes they're really helpful and sometimes they're not. It is worth being mindful of the fact that if you go directly to a recruiter, they will only put you forward for roles that they have clients who will pay them a fee for. They won't go out to market and actually actively look outside those companies that they're already working with. So do be open that recruitment companies can be amazing, but do apply to employers directly as well. And within New Zealand, you've got local and overseas competition. So as clintivene mentioned, New Zealand is a really attractive destination to migrate to. So you're not just competing with people who are here locally, you're also competing with other migrants who want to move. So you do need to make sure that your CV is really watertight and you're submitting the best applications you can in order to beat that local and overseas competition. In some cases, if you are in those green list roles, obviously that competition is significantly minimized because there isn't a huge number of Kiwis available to do those roles. Don't get too caught up on the role title. So what your occupation is called at home may have a different name here. What I recommend doing is when you're looking at applying for jobs, go and look at the job description or the tasks and duties which are listed within that job advert. And if that fits what you ordinarily would do or you have experience in, but the job title is not quite the same, then still apply for that role because it may just be that we call it something different down here. New Zealand really values itself on its work-life balance. So when you leave the office, you leave the office. Most employers don't expect you to take work home. They don't expect you to answer calls outside hours unless, of course, that is a requirement of your role. But we really value having, a life outside of work. So if you're from a country where that's not the case, you will find that a really pleasant change. And with that comes the fact that New Zealand is incredibly family friendly. So all employers are very mindful of the fact that people have families outside of work. So if your kids are sick or you need to rush off because there's been some kind of emergency, then your employers will generally help you with that to make sure that you can keep working to the best of your ability while you look after family as well. New Zealand Shores offers a job search package. So it is support that we offer. We don't actively go out and look for employment for you. In some cases, we can actually recommend you to recruiters or employers who we know are looking for your particular skills. But ultimately, it is up to you to own that job search process. But within that support, we give you a formatted resume or CV that is tailored to what New Zealand employers are looking for. We give you a cover letter template that you can adjust and amend based on the role you're applying for. We give you some support around interview techniques and preparing for not only applying for roles, but interviews as well. And we can be here to offer support. So one of the great things about using an immigration consultancy, which is based in New Zealand, is we have staff who are also working in the New Zealand time zone. So if you're applying for a role, an employer comes back and says, yes, your profile looks great, but I'm concerned about, I don't know what accreditation means, or I don't know what a job check is, or how does this visa process work? We give you a support letter which has your advisor's details on it that prompts the employer to reach out to them. So we are more than happy to help guide employers through the process, and we do offer separate services for accreditation and job checks to employers as well. And often those employers will actually get us to do it, so we can actually take care of that whole life cycle of that process for you. If you do need an occupational registration, depending on the board you need registration with, we do have some staff who are skilled across different registration processes, so we can give you guidance in that space if it's required. And we do also provide our clients with a really awesome settlement pack, which just has a whole bunch of information about how to look for rental properties, how to get tax numbers, banks, and how to set up bank accounts from offshore, getting a driver's license, all of that kind of information. So we try to prepare you as much as possible for your migration to New Zealand outside of that specific visa process as well.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. I'm just going to quickly skim over this slide, but just a reminder that what is an immigration agent? Essentially, it's someone who advocates on your behalf and holds your hand throughout the immigration process. So we've been doing this since 2009. We've assisted over 15,000 families across 21,000 visa applications, and we have just under 99% visa approval rating. So a very, very solid track record of assisting families with their New Zealand relocation. I'm very, very proud of this. As Charlotte touched on early on in this webinar, our team has experience on both sides of the job, with previous immigration case officers now part of the team. So we know what Immigration New Zealand is looking for in an application and how to best mitigate their concerns. Do shop around. If you do decide to embark on this journey with an immigration agent, it's important that you shop around, do your homework, and see what the service is worth. We charge very fair fees, and we pride ourselves in providing a personalized service. So again, very proud of this. And a key asset for us is that we are not only a multinational team, but we also have multi-country presence. So we can assist you across multiple time zones. As Charlotte just mentioned, having 3 offices in New Zealand allows us to liaise with prospective employers, so acting on your behalf for employment. And I think a key benefit of using an immigration advisor is that everyone has unique circumstances. You might be just under the age limit, or you have adult kids, or minor health concerns, previous convictions. Do talk to us, have a chat with us on not only defining a pathway, but getting an idea of whether those minor complications might be a massive hurdle in your journey, or if they're really non-consequential. Mistakes are costly. A lot of people do all of that themselves and are successful. A lot of people also do it themselves and waste a lot of time and money by not going through the right channels. So we see a lot of misinformation on forums, particularly on Facebook and the like. So do be careful what you read. A lot of people are providing advice in good faith, but it might just be a reflection of their personal experience and not a reflection of the norm of or what Immigration New Zealand is looking for. So in that respect, just reading stuff on social media can actually be quite dangerous. immigration advice in New Zealand is highly regulated industries. All of our advisors are licensed by the government, by the Immigration Advisor Authority, and across all of our team and our entire company, in fact, we've had not a single complaint with the IAA. If a licensed advisor makes a mistake or you're unhappy with the service, it is your right to complain with that government body, and we haven't had a single complaint like this held against our company. So very proud of this. And I guess a reflection of that service is by just reading Google reviews or reviews on other medias, and you'll see what people say about our service. Great. So now we're just going to quickly skim through a few questions that we've received as part of registration for this webinar. Would you like to just throw questions at us, clintivene?
Yes, sure. So some of the questions have already been answered in the chat box, but do keep sending them through. We will endeavor to get through them, time permitting. But the first question, really, the most frequently asked question is, will it be possible to relocate with my family? So as I mentioned in the work visa section, once the main applicant secures a job offer and submits the accredited employer work visa, there will be a possibility for you to include your partner and your children as well. So the partner will get an open partner work visa and the children will get dependent student visas depending on their age, but each family's circumstances are unique, as Charlotte touched on briefly with having older dependent children. So please do contact us for more specific advice with regards to your scenario. How long does the entire process take? Fabien, do you want to take that one?
Sure. It's a very hard question to answer because it depends on your pathway. If you're willing to study in New Zealand, it's a pretty, we can answer quite accurately. It starts with documentation stage, which could be a couple of weeks, then enrollment at the university, which can be another 2 to 3 weeks, and then the visa is another 2 months roughly. And then from there, it comes down to the duration of your qualification, where that leads you to, and how long you might have to work in New Zealand before you secure residency. So we can answer reasonably accurately in terms of visa processing or enrollment. The big question mark is the whole job search and securing a role. We have a wide array of situations here with our clients, whereby some clients come to us with a job offer in hand from the get-go, and then we assist with the visa process, while other clients come to us early on in the process so we can carefully assist them throughout the documentation stage. It could be a few weeks or a few months, and then they go out and look for work. Some decide to come on shore in New Zealand as visitors. That personal touch is something that New Zealand employers certainly appreciate if you're able to come and visit New Zealand in person. Others are quite happy doing interviews via Zoom, and a lot of our clients do secure employment that way. So it could be a few weeks or a few months before you secure a job, and then how long the entire process will take will really depend on the visa pathway.
Thanks for that. Next question is, how can I get visa sponsorship and how do I quickly get a job in New Zealand? Charlotte, do you want to touch base on that? Because you were answering questions about the job search.
Yes, so in New Zealand, we don't actually use the word sponsorship when it comes to obtaining a job offer in New Zealand, because sponsorship alludes to a fact that the employer is actually responsible for you, which in New Zealand they're not. So there are obviously accredited employers who are already open to hiring migrants. However, just because an employer isn't accredited doesn't mean that they aren't willing to go through that process. As a company, we're still submitting new accreditations every day for companies who have decided they want to hire a migrant from offshore and who are only just starting to go through that process now because it's only become necessary for them at this point. So definitely don't just narrow your search down to employers who are already accredited. Make sure you just apply for roles which are relevant to you. How do you quickly get a job in New Zealand? That's, I guess, how long is a piece of string? That's a really, really hard question to answer. Some people will get jobs really quick. Sometimes I'm absolutely amazed at how fast some clients do get jobs, and then some people will take much longer. And there doesn't seem to be any particular reason as to why people fall into either category. Sometimes it's the job market, sometimes it's the economy, sometimes it may be you were the 101st person to apply for a job, but they only looked at the first 100 CVs. So do be persistent. My clients who are persistent with the job search are the ones who are successful. The quickest I've ever had a client get a job offer was about 2 weeks after they signed up with our services. I'd love to claim that as my success, but it really was just good luck. And the longest I've had a client take is 3 years, but I think he was applying for about 1 job every 6 months. So you do have to be really dedicated to the process, and the more dedicated you are, the more careful you are about the jobs you apply for, the faster you will secure employment in New Zealand. So there isn't any particular method to use other than just being dedicated to the process.
Okay. Can I get a tourist visa to a work visa? So yes, you can. You can potentially come onshore and get a general visitor visa. And then once you secure an offer of employment, depending on how long your general visitor visa is valid for, we can then potentially transition you to a work visa while you are onshore. But there are a lot of factors with that. Most of our clients, I would say about 98% of our clients, do not need to come onshore to look for work. First of all, it is quite costly to do so, and there are no guarantees that when you do hop on a plane that you will immediately secure employment within the first 2 weeks or a week that you arrive onshore. So we only really encourage our clients to come onshore as a last resort. But yes, to briefly answer your question, that is a possibility, but I would encourage you to get specific advice, just so we can see whether there are other options to potentially getting you onshore. So that may be a working holiday visa, or potentially under the student visa pathway if you are eager to come onshore immediately. Okay, Fabian, will you answer this question about IELTS that has been completed 2 years ago?
Yeah, sure. So I took an IELTS 2 years ago, had band 6.5. Is it still valid? That's a great question. The first comment would be that English tests are not typically required for temporary visas, unless you're in a low-skill occupation. So it's really a matter to be mindful of for a residency application, which then becomes a mandatory requirement. Unfortunately, the validity of English test results is 2 years. So if you took a test 2 years ago, it has now expired. So you're going to have to take a new one, which you can do offshore or in New Zealand.
I think this would most likely be the last question. If I get a job in New Zealand, can I buy a property? Charlotte, do you want to handle that one for us, please?
Yeah, so New Zealand has laws around who can and can't buy property. So typically speaking, you have to either be a New Zealand citizen or resident. There are a couple of exceptions to that. So if you are an Australian citizen or a Singaporean citizen, you can actually purchase property in New Zealand as well. However, if you're coming over on a work visa or a student visa, you cannot purchase property until you have held residence. Not only do you have to hold a resident visa, you have to be deemed ordinarily resident in New Zealand, and typically the threshold for that is that you've been living in New Zealand for 12 months. For example, if you come in on a straight to resident visa and you want to buy property quickly, you absolutely can do so. There's just a process you have to go through with our overseas investment office. There is a fee attached to it, and I am sorry, but I don't know what the fee is. But basically, you just have to provide evidence, I guess, that you've to some degree settled in New Zealand, and then they will allow you to go ahead and purchase property before you've met that 12-month threshold.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. I'm quickly going to skim through the last 3 because we've actually covered them as part of the presentation. So I guess the question that pops in everyone's mind now is, what's the next step? We do provide, as part of our very initial service, a free eligibility assessment, which essentially nets out what the pathways to New Zealand are for you based on your specific skills. So we just need your date of birth, your CV, resume, or your partner's CV as well. And then we can identify the quickest or the best options towards residency, whatever they may be. So how to go about this, reach out to either of us three, Charlotte, Clintivene, or myself, Fabien, and then we'll email you straight back. If we have your CV on file, we should be in a position to document that report. If not, please attach it, and then we'll come back to you as soon as we can. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and hopefully we meet a lot of you guys next week for the Australian webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.